Good morning. I'm Cathy White. This is the 31st of August, 2023. I'm interviewing Jeannie Manthei in part of a project for celebrating the 150th anniversary of the church.
Yes.
Thank you, Jean, for coming. I have just a couple of questions that we thought might be good jumping off points. And the first is your first memories of First Congregational Church.
Well, my dad was minister here in 1938, and then his last church was Broadmoor Community Church. And then when they retired from Broadmoor Community, they would come here for the church services on Sunday mornings. And I was, struggling with a lot of mental illness at the time and some difficulties in my personal life. And my parents would bring me over to church on Sunday mornings because they thought it would be good for me. And so they were right, and I think what I really appreciated when I first started coming to First Church was that it wasn't extremist in its views, that it wasn't like a cult or something like that. And when you have like psychiatric symptoms or when you're struggling with mental health issues, you really appreciate that.
I'm sure.
Because a lot of churches and places have extremist views, and they're like cults, and so that can be very difficult when you have mental health issues and things like that. So I was very appreciative of that. But that's kind of my first memory. And Jerry Jordan was the preacher that was the minister back then.
Did he follow your dad after your dad left, then Jerry Jordan came?
Well, my dad was actually here in 1938. So Jerry Jordan, I don't know, he might have come in the 70s sometime.
Oh,
or
I
something
see. Oh,
like
yes,
that.
so there was quite a span there.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I kind of remember about then Jerry went off to Illinois or Wisconsin or something like that, and then Jim White came on board, and Paul Tatter and Jim White and my dad, well, they had their hands kind of like this, on each other, and Paul Tatter and my dad sort of passed the baton to Jim White, and it was very heartwarming.
That is heartwarming.
Kind of to do that. And then there was, and then my dad did a little bit of guest preaching sometimes, and I remember he had, there was two women in the church who had been in the church when my dad was here in 1938. And he, in this sermon that he did, he pointed out the two sisters, and he said, they're sitting in the same places where they were sitting in 1938, And so so that was very endearing. He kind of brought, the similarities and the things that hadn't changed between, say, 1938 and 1992, or whenever he was doing his guest preaching, and the things that were different, and the things that had changed, and the things that had kind of kept the church together and sort of unified, people to stay, proactive in the church and things like that.
Yeah, that's a great lens to see through. See things through.
So that was like really kind of important. And one of the things that I really kind of like about First Church is that, they make it like, people always have a need to feel, special or important and things like that. And I think First Church kind of goes over backwards to helping people to feel kind of important or special, so that everybody kind of feels special, and that there isn't just, a one-man show or, superstars, and things like that. So there's kind of a very feeling of community with First Church and a lot of the congregational churches, I think, is because they go out of their way to make people feel special and accepted,
Yeah, that's great. So community and continuity, it's kind of, just going back for a moment to what your father was saying during his sermon, that whole idea of being able to say, I was here so long ago, here's proof of that because I know these two women, but so much has changed in society, in religion, in whatever else, but these are the things that really stay, that there are certain things that really remain.
Right. And my dad came from a more traditional era, like with the church, and they were kind of back then, like Paul Tillich and all the theologians were kind of part of their seminary experience and things like that.
So what a time to be in the UCC.
Yeah. And back then it was much more traditional, because I remember when I was growing up, the people wore, dresses to church, and it was all very formal. It was all very, in some ways that was good, but in some ways, I kind of like it now. I mean, now you could wear a pair of jeans to church and you wouldn't be thrown out, right?
Yeah.
But you couldn't do that back then.
And the culture, of course, was more formal as well.
Yeah. So now it's a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more easygoing, But one of the things, like in 2010, I published my first book. It was on gratitude, and Jim White came and gave some prayers and some thoughts and blessings for my book, and like I never got married in the church or did any of those kind of things, but I had this nice release party for my book and things. And then when I published my second book, Photography and Schizophrenia, this June, like I had a release party at the church not too long ago on August 12th, and Leanne came and said, some prayers and some blessing, and it was just really endearing, and so I think the fact that I'm not as proactive in other things in the church, the fact that people still make time for you and make you feel special,
and you have a place here.
Yeah, and you have a place, and I feel accepted, and I think that's so important.
Yeah, I think that's everything.
Yeah, and that's what's different about our church, I think, is that you do feel accepted, even if you have, any kind of, peculiarities or whatever, that you still are welcomed and supported.
Right.
So.
Yeah, very interesting. So one of these questions, Jean, is what do you value most about the church and the community? And it seems like you've done a great job explaining that.
I really think, the fact that we were, like more active in things like the civil rights movement or the, gay movement and other kinds of things, and we have that social consciousness that is open and affirming, I think is very, very important, and I really like that. And so, like, going into the next 150 years, I hope they keep that.
Yeah.
I hope we keep that as a church. That we're aware and affirming and caring about our community and the people in the community and stuff. So I think that's I've heard that several times now. I've done some of these other interviews, and people have often said that they would really hope, as we move forward, as the church itself moves forward and as society moves forward, that there will be these bedrock things that remain for this particular church. Yeah. Right. And like things that I like about the church, that we have is, back in the 90s, I went to Koinonia, which was a spiritual support group here at the church, and it was they had like scripture that we would look at, or books that we would look at, and then we would sit and talk about them in the Koinonia meetings and things like that. And we had a spiritual mentor, and Lucy Bell was my spiritual mentor then, and she's been kind of a friend throughout my time at the church and stuff like that, and then Sheila had her dream group, and I went to a few of those back in the 90s, and I really liked those, and especially with my interest in psychology and stuff like that. So that was pretty nice, and then. For a while there, I got into. There was a Jim White has these speakers come, once a year, and with Russ, there was a time when I brought my camera and I covered one of those speakers, and it was kind of spiritual photography and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I didn't stay doing that a lot as much. But I want to kind of maybe get back into a little bit of that. And I had thought of maybe doing a spiritual photography group, where people could kind of come and share photos and
spiritual images
and do some nice.
But that's a great idea.
Yeah. And talk about the more spiritual aspects of photography and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because everybody has a story, so.
And picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
How about specific other memories you would like to share about times here? Anything else that comes up for you?
Like I haven't been as good a churchgoer as I should have been. Like I don't come every Sunday, but I've been watching them on this, like the videos, and I like that. So I haven't been as active, like on committees or other kinds of things like that. So where I would have a lot of memories, or I would have a lot of, interaction with other church members and things like that. But I just stay connected into this because I feel like there's an important aspect to prayer. There's an important aspect to community. And even though I'm not as active in the community, I still feel the community. I still feel connected here in a lot of ways.
That's terrific. We were just talking at the interview I did previously about the fact that connections seems to be really the word of the hour now. Is the idea that we really need to feel connected. We need to find our people and be with our people, and that it might make such a difference in our lives.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of times people feel, isolated sometimes, like I live alone, and I'm not married or any of those kind of things, and so having my church to feel that community with is very important, and prayer has been very helpful in the way that I've healed or worked with mental health symptoms and things like that, and so
that's so interesting. Prayer has really been a road for you, a path for you.
Yeah. And when you come to First Church, you can always count on a pretty good sermon.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty good. I should come to church more often, but I work all the time, so I don't I get tired, and so on Sundays I just want to sleep.
That's where the Zoom comes in handy, that you can play it at a different time.
Yes, yeah. So I really kind of appreciate that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Born of the pandemic, one of the good things that came out of the pandemic.
Yeah.
That it's so much more. It is more accessible now.
Right.
At whatever time you feel you can enjoy it or need it or that type of thing. Yeah.
And I really like the children's sermons and stuff like that. And Jerry Jordan, I remember he used to have the brown bag.
Brown bags, yeah.
And would have something for the kids. And I think that's so nice in terms of, not forgetting the newer generation.
Right. Oh, yeah, for sure.
That.
As Leanne said, they're the future.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the way they handle the adolescents is pretty good too, like in terms of encouraging responsibility and assertiveness and things like that. And I think that's...
And acceptance. I think acceptance is a big thing. Particularly at that time of life, it's important. There's so much swirling around and so many things that would say, is this okay? Is that okay? And there just seemed to be a blanket of acceptance.
Right. I can remember Jerry Jordan's kids when they were kind of growing up in the church a little bit, when I was way back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And, they were always well behaved. I wasn't so well behaved as a preacher's kid. I was not so well behaved. I always think that's really a nice thing. Preachers' kids, like in the church and stuff like that, because we are a little bit wilder, some of us, but
yeah. Well, it must be an interesting milieu to grow up in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was lovely to hear you talk about when you said my parents made me go to church. Turned out they were right.
Yeah. Well, when you struggle with, mental health symptoms, and you also, I mean, psychology and therapy is very, very important, and staying on your meds and going to treatment and doing all those things. But
It's a full-time job.
Yeah, but I also think prayer and spirituality can be very, very helpful in that, and I know that throughout the years there's been contemplative prayer at the church, and I've gone to some of those.
And that's starting up again now.
Yeah, and I went to some of them in the spring.
Oh, excellent.
And I really liked them, and way back in the 80s and 90s, or in the 90s, I think there was some contemplative prayer groups that were...
Yeah, they would meet early in the morning. I think one group met early in the morning, one group met after work to kind of accommodate. But yes, that's right. I had forgotten that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I came to that contemplative group early in the morning, and Jerusha Goebel was there, and Jim White.
Yeah.
And I think Paul was with us as well. And Jerusha leaned over to me and said, "Do you know anything about contemplative prayer?" And I said, "No, I don't, but my father has just died." And she said, "Well, great, this is a terrific place. Contemplative prayer is just like curling up in the lap of Jesus. So for the next 45 minutes, just focus on that."
Yeah.
And I found that to be incredibly healing.
Yeah. And there's just a lot of things like that at the church that I really appreciate, that isn't just all this hype and pomp and circumstance. There's some real things that we do here as a church that I think are very valuable for people.
Oh, I agree. A couple of Sundays ago, we had that a cappella Sunday. Half the congregation was at Foret, and so Leanne decided she would all the singing would be done a cappella. And perhaps you saw it on Zoom. Anyway, toward the end of the service, she said, "I think we should sing the song that we sing all the time at the end. Right. What does the Lord require?" The people I interviewed just a few minutes ago mentioned that song, of course. Right. And so we sang it through, and it sounded lovely as always. But then she said, "Now I want you to turn toward one another, and I want you to sing it again." Right. And again, that was that idea of connecting, as you mentioned, that and feeling like that someone knew you, that you were, as you said, you were special, that everyone is really, has their place and their way.
And their contribution.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, Foret, the all-church campouts, I've really enjoyed those over the years, And I got to sing my little song, my recovery song, and that was kind of fun. And
you still playing your guitar?
Yeah, I played my guitar and did that. And then there was, the Labyrinth out at Foret, and that walking the Labyrinth was kind of cool. When earlier on, the church, all church campouts were more formal in some ways, and then they kind of loosened up a little bit. So there was swimming, and then you could kind of go off and do your own thing and meditate, or go to work on the Labyrinth, or snap pictures, or do whatever you wanted,
and meet later.
But before, they had like so many activities that it kind of cut into, your sort of spiritual experience out there, so I was glad when they kind of dispensed with so many activities.
It's so interesting, isn't it, the process that any organization goes through in trying to adjust to what seems to be going on in the culture, but still holding on to those bedrock things. The community and the connecting.
So I'm not sure what else. I was trying to think of all the things that I could say, and I just and I said, well, I have some memory issues, so I don't know if I'll be able to remember all these things. But
you've done a great job. What do you value most in the church? Share one of your favorite memories. What advice would you give to the congregation? And you mentioned you hope that they take these bedrock principles and move them forward.
And I hope they continue to have, like creative things for people to do and to get involved in, because all that pomp and circumstance stuff is nice, but it kind of cuts away from people's real spiritual experiences, and so I think going into the next 150 years, I think it's important to have things that connect people, You know, like
I agree.
photography does that.
It
you
does.
know, like and what you know, Russ has done with all that, and
Absolutely.
music is very, very important in the community and things like that. So.
Yes, all connecting points. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Anything else you want to tell me?
I can't think of anything.
Okay. It was so nice to see you.
Yeah, it was really
And
nice.
thank
to see
you so much for coming.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.